America is an exceptional country. When our country was founded, we crafted a constitution that Thomas Jefferson explained would serve as chains to bind the mischief of government. There's never been more mischief of government than there is right now. And the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, are precious to every American. The Bill of Rights begins with the First Amendment. For over 2 centuries, Congress has not dared to mess with the Bill of Rights. This amendment, here today, if adopted, would repeal the free speech protections of the First Amendment. Mr. Chairman, when citizens hear that, they gasp. As immune as we are to abuse of power from government, citizens are still astonished that members of Congress would dare support repealing the First Amendment. And let's be clear, this amendment doesn't just do it for corporations, it doesn't just do it for billionaires. Nothing in this amendment is limited to corporations or billionaires. This amendment, if adopted, would give Congress absolute authority to regulate the political speech of every single American, with no limitations whatsoever. This amendment is about power, and it is about politicians silencing the citizens. Mr. Chairman, when did elected Democrats abandon the Bill of Rights? Mr. Chairman, where did the liberals go?
We're right here, big guy. We're right here. Where did the real conservatives go? The ones who actually believe in small government and don't want massive corporations and billionaires corrupting the politicians and doing their will, doing their bidding? Look, the thing about that pissed me off is that he's arguing in favor of corruption and he's acting like he's arguing in favor of the opposite. That was, again, that was like a movie speech. Like with his whole cadence and the way he structured what he's saying. Mr. Chairman, where did all the real Democrats go? Where did the liberals go? I like when he says, this amendment repeals free speech. And when people hear that, when citizens hear that, they gasp. Right, they gasp because it's not true. You're lying to them. And if that were true, they should gasp. If it were true that Congress was like, you know what? Let's actually get rid of freedom of speech. That would be fantastic. Then yes, everybody should gasp. But you're lying to them. That's not true. Again, what this has to do with is money in politics. So to give you the backstory on this, in the late 1970s, in the Supreme Court case Buckley versus Vallejo, they basically said that money equals free speech, that campaign limits are not legitimate because it's a restriction on the First Amendment. Now, again, that's not true. That's an activist judge right there because, of course, the First Amendment, if they wanted money to equal free speech, they would have mentioned money. They would have said you have freedom of speech, freedom to buy politicians, et cetera, but they didn't say that. They specifically laid out you have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, but they didn't say freedom to buy politicians, right? So it was activist judges and activist court that said, yes, money equals free speech. They just made it up. And then later with Citizens United and then later with McCutcheon, that those were basically decisions that further struck down the few remaining campaign finance laws that we had. So it put the idea of money equaling free speech on steroids and made the corruption even worse. And when Ted Cruz says, well, there's never been more mischief in Congress right now, which is why you need to be against this, he's got it exactly backwards. Yes, there's never been more mischief in Congress than right now, and that's why you should be for this, okay? And as I've described to you guys before, the amendment that they're talking about in the committee hearing, it's from Chuck Schumer and Udall, and basically what it does is it says, okay, let's roll back the Citizens United and the McCutcheon decision and roll back parts, that's important, parts of Buckley versus Vallejo. So in other words, what they want to do is give Congress the ability to regulate money in politics again and put limits, right? but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do it. And by the way, they wouldn't be able to do it because even if they have the ability, the House of Representatives is majority Republican right now. So they would just not, vote on anything that would actually bring back some sort of limits. So the idea is a decent idea, but it's still not even good enough. The Wolfpack Amendment is the perfect amendment because that says it bans the idea of corporate personhood and it bans money equaling free speech. It explicitly says money does not equal free speech, and it says all elections need to be publicly financed. That's the real amendment. That's even stronger than the one that the Senate Democrats are proposing. So the Democrats, while they're stepping in the right direction, it's still not enough, right? But Ted Cruz frames it as if, he's the savior of your freedoms and the Bill of Rights, and, he's going to protect the First Amendment. No, what you're doing is you're protecting corruption. What you're doing is you're protecting the billionaires. He acts like he's not doing that, but that's exactly what he's doing. And by the way, this isn't just speculation. There was a study that came out recently, we discussed it on the show, where it went into detail showing opinion polls of the rich and opinion polls of the majority of the American people. And what they found is that from 1980 and onward, the American people have no say as to the policies that we get. We have no influence on our own politicians in a fucking democracy. How crazy is that? But who does have influence? The rich. The corporations, the billionaires, the donor class, as they're called. So if you give over $10,000 to a politician, they do your bidding, right? And what Ted Cruz is doing is he's saying, no, I'm going to stand up for the right of us to be bought. I'm going to stand up for legal bribery. I'm going to stand up for this nonsense idea that money equals free speech. And again, I don't know how many times I've mentioned this on the show, but to say money equals free speech is basically like saying whoever is worth the most amount of money has the loudest voice in a democracy. So our voices aren't equal to Sheldon Adelson. Our voices aren't equal to the Koch brothers. Even for the people on the right wing, their voices aren't equal to George Soros or Warren Buffett. And this isn't a partisan issue. The establishment Republicans and Democrats are both in one way or another going to be in favor of corruption, right? It's just that, about 90% of the American people? So all independents, majority of Democrats, and a majority of Republicans are all with us on this.